3 weeks after the forum in Lower Manhattan, New York felt like it had adjusted to my name the way a city adjusts to a new construction site. People stepped around it, they stared without staring, the hearings had begun, budgets were dragged into light. My father's death certificate was amended, and yet the thing that kept me awake wasn't the noise, it was the gaps. The files I released sketched the structure of Origin and its money, but the origin of Origin kept dodging the page. The crest on the vault door was older than agencies, nor kept saying that, find the first donor and you'll find the first sin. She was right, and it was starting to feel personal in a way I didn't want. The first break came from a historian at Columbia who messaged through a friend of Nor's. She had found a Rowan seal pressed into wax on a ledger from 1901 in a medical philanthropy archive. The entry line read like a prayer, pretending to be science. Rowan Endowment for Resilience. Ward Trials approved. She sent a scan of a page with my family's crest stamped in red. The ward was in Boston, attached to a hospital that still exists. If you want the rest, she wrote, you need to see it in person. They don't scan the donor correspondence. We took the first train north, because that is how you measure truth, in miles. The Boston air had the kind of cold that convinces you it is older than you are. Nor moved through stacks like she had lived in archives her whole life. The librarian rolled out a flat gray box that smelled like dust and lemon oil. Inside were letters tied with twine, penned in a firm 19th century hand. The first shocked me with its neatness. On behalf of the Rowan Endowment, we approve the additional beds for the fever ward, survivors to be tracked for 30 years, failures to be recorded without surnames. I read the line twice. I wanted it to say something else, survivors to be tracked. I looked at Nor and then at Gabriel and felt my face go cold. My family had not just donated money. We had specified what counted as a survivor. We had invented the euphemism. The letters got worse. A Rowan ancestor, Thomas Rowan I, not my father, wrote that heritable resilience should be encouraged through careful union, and that promising strains should be protected from dilution. I knew what those words meant the way you know a storm when the temperature falls all at once. They meant breeding. They meant people as plans. Nor pressed 2 fingers to the margin and said nothing. Gabriel paced away, the way you do when you want to leave a room you cannot leave. The last letter in the bundle was smaller and more practical. It described a private clinic on the North Shore that would record births within the circle and file them as charity cases to hide the expense. The letter was signed with the Rowan seal I had seen my whole life on the spine of a book in my grandmother's house. We left the archive before dusk and drove the coast road. The clinic now was a daycare, and then it wasn't. Under the new paint was the old door frame. Nor found a brass plate in the soil line where there shouldn't have been one. A marker you would miss if you were not trained to look. The plate bore a number. That number matched a number in the Boston letters. Gabriel ran it against the vault index we had pulled in New York and tied it to a second cache. The second vault wasn't in a bunker. It was under a summer house that sat half abandoned on a bluff near Manchester, by the sea. We got there at night because people like us always arrive at night. The boards over the windows were new. The salt in the air tasted honest. Inside, the house had been stripped to its studs except for a single bookcase of fake spines. The mechanism behind it was simple and expensive. The stairs led down, the air got colder. Another door waited, circular emblem, same crest. I pressed my palm to the panel, because by now I understood that my body opened doors my head didn't know existed. The vault clicked like it had been waiting a century for that sound. What lived there wasn't money. It was film and wax cylinders and ledgers written in a different ink. A projector sat under a sheet. Gabriel threaded film through it, and a silent picture shook to life on the wall. Doctors in white coats, a row of cots, a woman with hollow eyes, a child with a number on a tag at the wrist, not a name. A doctor tapped a chest with a finger and turned to a man in a black coat wearing a signet with a crest I could draw from memory. The man nodded, the film jumped, the frame cut to a door with a plaque that said Resilience Ward. My breath came out in one sound. Nor shut off the projector and pulled a ledger to the table. The columns were tidy the way cruel people like tidy records. Date, age, fever, survived, didn't, followed, married, children. It was a map of lives written as boxes and checks. At the back were 3 pages that did not fit the rest. They were later 20th century typed, origin charter, founding memorandum. The signatures were familiar and not. One was an early Cole, one was a Hale, and one was a Rowan, not the ancestor but my grandfather. The language was careful. To steward selective heritable resilience in the public interest. I stared at the verbs steward. Selective, public interest. I had used the phrase public interest in my work 100 times. I felt dirty hearing it now. We copied what we could and left the house before the caretaker, who had never cared, could wake and care. Back in New York, the hearings sharpened. A senator held up a copy of one of the letters and asked where charity ended and control began. There wasn't an answer the room could hold. The story shifted online in a way that I could feel in my phone. People posted about grandparents who had been in fever wards they'd been told were charity. Nurses wrote in careful threads about charts that didn't add up. Origin spokespeople denied and then pivoted. They called it historic context. They called it past practice. The city shrugged, then frowned, then got angry. The anger wasn't just about what was done. It was about who had done it in the name of helping. Sophie called from a quiet room and said she had found something worse. The birth registry for a year that mattered to me had a duplicate entry, one for me, one for an unnamed infant in the same hour with the same weight. I told her that was impossible. She said the entry number was printed and then reprinted. She said the doctor who signed both had signed a training document she had seen overseas. Her voice thinned to a line. Liz, I think Dad made a deal to keep you off the books, and I think someone else didn't get that choice. The room leaned. I sat down because I could feel my body preparing to fall. Gabriel stopped moving for the first time since Boston. Nor looked like she already knew the shape of what was coming, even if she didn't know the words. It didn't take long to find the name. The second infant was listed as Charity Case 12. 3 months later there was a note, transferred to ward. 6 months later the line went blank. No death, no discharge, just nothing. The hospital that held the records had been closed for decades, folded into another system that changed its name when the money changed. But the basement didn't care about rebrands. Boxes still live where people put them. We got in because nurses opened doors for other nurses. Even if Noor had only ever worked inside rooms people like to pretend are not part of hospitals. The box we needed was heavy with damp. Inside were charity case tags and a wooden tray with glass vials and a log in my grandfather's hand. 3 rows down was 12. The entry carried a note added later in my father's writing. It said, moved by request, no billing. Below it, a line I cannot unread, confirmed compatibility, R. I wanted to stop. I wanted the story where my father was only a shield to be the only story. But the next page had his signature again, this time on a consent form for neonatal samples for longitudinal study, with my birth date, my time, my weight. He had signed for me. Maybe he thought he was saving me by making my body the price. Maybe he told himself he was choosing the smaller harm. Noor touched my shoulder, not to comfort but to keep me from leaving the room before I saw everything I had to see. Gabriel said nothing. He understood that some silences are not absence, they are respect. We drove to my grandmother's house in Astoria because there was one person who might have the last missing piece. The apartment still had the same book with the crest on the spine. The TV was on mute, showing the hearings like a weather map. My grandmother had the face of someone who has outlived more than anyone should, and the patience to wait me out. I put the ledger on her table. I pointed to my father's signature on the consent form. "Did he tell you?" I asked. She nodded once, small and exact. "He told me he was choosing between two machines," she said. "One that would keep the secret for our benefit, and one that would keep the secret for theirs. He believed he was breaking it by keeping it." I asked her what that meant. She told me something I didn't want. "Your bloodline started this, not origin, us. They learned from us. Your father thought he could end it by making sure the key stayed in our house until someone kinder held it." I asked about Charity Case 12. My grandmother looked at the TV instead of my face and said the name like a prayer. Mara. I had never heard that name in my family. She had been my cousin. She had been the second infant that day. She had been transferred. She had been lost. Your father tried to find her. My grandmother said he failed. She took a small tin from a drawer and opened it. Inside was a photograph curled by time of two infants in a hospital crib. One was me. The other was a stranger who might have been my mirror. On the back, in my father's neat hand, was a date and the word both. I sat down because there was nowhere else to go. The next days moved fast, because that is what happens after you admit what you have been avoiding. Nor traced Mara through 3 false names to a clinic in New Jersey that billed no patients and had a 7-figure burn. We hit the building with the same method we always do. Walk like you belong. Walk like you are tired. Walk like the elevator is supposed to open. The elevator opened. On the 3rd floor, the doors slid back on a hallway that smelled like antiseptic and bureaucracy. There were 4 rooms with observation glass, and 3 were empty. The 4th had a bed with a woman, sitting upright and ready. She looked like me in the way a reflection looks like you when the light is wrong. Older, tired in the eyes, scar down the wrist where I have none. I knew before Nor said the name, Mara. I wanted a reunion that healed every sentence we had read. We did not get that. Mara looked over my shoulder at Gabriel and then at Nor, and then past them to a door we could not see through and said, "At least you finally read your own history." Her voice was clean and sharp. "They kept me because it was easy. You kept the key because it was easy." She looked back at me. "We are not accidents. We are not miracles. We are the result of a decision people with our name made a century ago." I told her I was sorry. She told me sorry was a currency that bought nothing inside those rooms. I asked her if she wanted to leave. She smiled in a way that did not forgive me. I did, until I read the other file. She nodded at the cabinet. Gabriel pulled it and found a folder with my father's signature again. Transfer by request. Trial suspended. Recipient R Alpha. He stopped one part, she said. He kept another. He chose you. He chose the air with the key. Footsteps came down the hall. Director Hale walked in like this was his living room. He did not pretend to be surprised. Nor stepped between us, and he stopped 2 feet short of a line only he could see. He said words I will remember because they were tidy and cruel. At last, the family meets. He listed leverage, warrants, safeguards. He said we were trespassing in a medical facility. He said he could call this a kidnapping. I told him to call it what it was. He looked at Mara and then at me, and understood the picture we made. I raised my phone to record. He smiled for the camera because some men cannot help themselves. We left with Mara because sometimes the door is less guarded than the idea. Hale did not stop us. He didn't need to. He had already planted what he came to plant. Back at the safe apartment, Mara read the vault scans with a steadier hand than mine. She told me something I needed and hated. Your father wasn't a villain in a story about villains, she said. He was a Rowan who looked at 2 rules and tried to write a 3rd. He broke the program on paper and kept the bloodline in practice. He called it stewardship. That is a pretty word for control. I asked her what she wanted. Names, she said, and the truth put in a place where it cannot be taken back. We recorded again because that is the only weapon we still had that could not be bought. I said my family's name. I said we were not only the victims of origin, we were the seed. I said my father loved us and still signed things he had no right to sign. I said we owe the people used in fever wards more than money. Nor posted it with the ledger scans and the film frames and the page with survivors to be tracked, circled in red. The city did the thing cities do when truth is ugly. It swallowed and then spoke. Descendants of charity cases began to contact us. Nurses confirmed the wards. Journalists who had been told to chase smaller stories came back to the bigger one. The hearings shifted from origin to origin, capital O to lowercase. The room got quiet in a way that meant people were finally listening to the part they were not going to like. That evening, Sophie arrived from the airport and closed the door and faced me with a look I hadn't seen since we were children. She said she had one more file, and that once I read it, I would not be able to unknow it. It was a memo from years ago on Henning and Cole letterhead. The subject line was a phrase I recognized from the old ledger, heritable resilient stewardship. The author was not a Hale or a Cole. It was my father, listed as a consultant long after he had supposedly left anything like that behind. The memo proposed a plan to transition oversight of key assets, away from government partners to a private foundation with multi-generational accountability. The foundation name was quiet. Rowan. I stared at the page until the letters blurred. The moral twist didn't arrive with a scream. It arrived with a spreadsheet tone and a line item for compliance. My father had tried to end origin by keeping the keys in our house. He had told himself it was safer if the people who started it ended it. But the plan still put people in boxes. It still used words like asset, where a name should be. It still turned surviving into property. The truth was simple and mean. We were not just the hunted. We had been the hunters once, and he had wanted me to inherit the leash so I could decide when to let go. The video we posted that night was the hardest thing I have ever said out loud. I told the world my father was a good man who did bad things because he believed they were the only choices left. I told them the bloodline I carry started a project that taught the wrong lesson, and that I had almost repeated it by keeping the key instead of burning it. I said the cures we found should have been free, that the harms we caused should be named, and that any authority I had by birth was revoked. Then I did the only thing that felt right. I published the last part of the vault, not just the crimes. The cures, not behind a negotiated wall, not dripped to partners who could profit, open, ugly, free. The shock did not show up as a headline. It showed up as a silence that lasts exactly 2 seconds after everyone reads the same sentence. Nora's phone lit with messages she had been waiting a decade to see. Hospital groups called emergency boards. A senator who had floated from camera to camera shut his mouth. Hale's statement came short and late. Cole's lawyers went very quiet. And then, like a second weather front, came the anger at me for shaming my own family. Traitor, one headline said, ingrate, said a man who had never said the word fever ward in his life. My grandmother turned off her TV and called me and said, good, and hung up, which was the only blessing I needed. The twist landed the next morning, when a courier brought a plain envelope with no return address. Inside was a single page from a notebook torn at the spiral. The handwriting was my father's, not the careful script he used for memos, the quick hand he used for thoughts he didn't plan to show anyone. It said, "If you are reading this, you did the thing I could not. I kept the key because I could not accept that we were the ones who built the door. I'm sorry, not for loving you, for thinking love was an excuse." Taped to the note was a photograph I had never seen. My father holding a baby that was not me. A tag on the wrist read 12. On the back he had written one word, daughter. I sat on the floor with that picture in my hands and understood the full shape of the harm. My father had not chosen me over a stranger. He had chosen one daughter over another. He had justified it by telling himself she was safer inside the system he could watch. He had written stewardship over a wound. The room went very still. Sophie put her hand on my shoulder and kept it there. Nor closed the blinds because she knows when it is time to be small. Gabriel stood by the door watching a hallway that was suddenly very long. This is where I tell you what I decided. I did not choose my father's plan. I did not choose Origin's plan. I chose the only thing that looked like a path that was not a circle. I gave the rest of the keys to a public trust that cannot be held by a family or a fund or a department. I named the harms with our name first. I asked for investigations that include us and start with us. There was no redemption soundtrack. There was a quiet day, and then a louder one, and then the work of people who show up without cameras. If you want the clean ending where the villains go to prison and the heroes stand on steps, you will not get it here. What you will get is a city that learned a different part of its own history and stamped a new note into its record. What you will get is a woman named Mara who texts me pictures of the ocean most mornings and writes one word. Both, what you will get is a family name that now means a warning instead of a password. And me still telling the story, not because I enjoy being looked at, but because the truth about control is not that it needs your silence. It is that it teaches you to mistake inheritance for responsibility. The twist was never that my family was innocent or evil. The twist was that we were ordinary people who learned the wrong lesson for 100 years and called it care. I keep the photograph in the journal next to my father's note. I keep the ledger page marked where the words survivors to be tracked. Live because I want to see them when I am tempted to tidy anything. I keep the crest because I refuse to pretend it never meant anything. And when the hearings try to tie a bow on what cannot be tied, I show up and I read the names without titles and without seals. That is the ending you get, not clean, not soft, true.